Hi, today I'd like to explain the basics of scavenging. For this demonstration, we're going to assume that the volume inside the combustion chamber remains constant for all RPMs. This is not what happens in real life, obviously, because temperature changes change the amount of air flowing into the combustion chamber, and throughout the RPMs, based on how the intake manifold is designed, it could limit the amount of air flowing into the combustion chamber, ultimately messing with the amount of volume of air and fuel you have inside the combustion chamber. Now, when an exhaust has scavenging occur, that's the moment when you can have gases aiding the other gases and help pull them out by means of negative pressure being created. Now, in an exhaust, anytime an exhaust merges together, you have opportunity to create scavenge. In this example here, we see a simple Y pipe. When the pulse is flowing through the front of the Y pipe here, it'll flow through, it'll have a constant volume as the walls don't change. When it merges in together, it'll have a moment when the volume is expanding, and then it'll go back into whatever diameter the engineer so chooses. But in this point, when it goes from its consistent volume to this increased volume, this creates the point of negative pressure. This empty space right here, once it passes it, this is where, trailing behind that pulse, negative pressure will be created. Now, after the initial fire, the combustion, the energy of the exhaust pulse will be reducing as it flows through an exhaust system. Once the exhaust valve closes, even though you can have scavenging occur even after an exhaust valve closed, it won't benefit the performance of the engine. It'll just evacuate that gas potentially a little faster. But even then, with it being closed, it creates a suction behind that gas, that pulse, so it won't help it to evacuate. In terms of scavenging, won't help that gas evacuate because behind it there's also pressure, negative pressure being created. Now, if scavenging occurs right when the exhaust valve opens, not only will it help evacuate the gas, but by evacuating the gas, going back to this diagram here, it's allowing for there to be less pressure in the combustion chamber for the piston to fight against as it pushes the gas up and through the valve and through the exhaust system. Now, a piston oscillates, and no matter what RPM, it'll have a point when it comes to complete rest, top dead center and bottom dead center. These triangles on the side here represent the speed of the piston as it oscillates. When it's at bottom dead center, about to push the gases out, it accelerates, reaches its maximum speed halfway through, and then starts its deceleration, and then reaches top dead center. If we can have scavenging occur right when it's at bottom dead center, about to accelerate, what this scavenge will do is it'll help to increase the potential speed of the cylinder as it reaches its halfway point in oscillation. So it'll be able, because the piston's able to be going faster and connected to the crankshaft and whatever else it's connected to, it'll increase the speed of the whole system, increasing the power of the engine. Pulses actually have a limit on how close they can get to each other. Because they're concentrated units of energy, they cannot bypass each other. They'll just run into each other but keep the same formation. So if you have a Y pipe where the tubes are at such a length where they combine into each other like this, even though they're close to each other, they won't bypass one another. They'll keep in formation. Whichever one is a couple molecules or so more, it'll flow in front of. Well, the point I'm trying to make is they don't combine. They keep themselves in their own bundle. Now, the goal of scavenging isn't to increase the speed of the exhaust pulse, because if the valve is closed, all that'll do is just increase the evacuation of exhaust gases, but it won't have any effect on the performance of the engine. But by having scavenging occur when the valve is open and it's at bottom dead center about to push the gases out, this accelerates the speed of the cylinder. That is our goal, to accelerate the speed of the cylinder, to make it easier for this guy to oscillate. Our first example is one of low RPM, where the merge occurs further away from the exhaust valves. So as the first pulse travels through, let's say 500 miles per hour, once it reaches that point where it can create negative pressure and evacuate the gas out of the second tube, or out of the second cylinder, the second cylinder just begins to push its exhaust gases out. So the valve just opened. Because it's positioned and timed perfectly, this negative pressure that this first pulse has created actually evacuates the gas out of this combustion chamber right when the piston is starting to accelerate upwards towards top dead center. Next example is the same thing, low RPM, but the merge occurring a lot sooner. So here, when this first pulse comes out at a speed of 500 miles an hour, it'll pass the point of merge and continue flowing out. If it hasn't flown all the way out through the exhaust, its scavenging could have an effect on the second cylinder as the exhaust valve opens up, and it can help evacuate some of those gases. But because it's positioned at a distance where it's not effective as much, it's not as efficient. That's saying if it isn't already out of the exhaust, once it is out, then there's no merging occurring. It'll have to fight through everything itself. So here at low RPM, this close merge collector isn't as effective. In our next example at high RPM, we have a similar situation as I've stated before. We have a merge occurring at a further distance. Now, because it's a higher RPM, the firing, so the creation of the exhaust pulses, occurs much closer in terms of how short it is, or in terms of time. So this one will occur, and then this one will occur right afterward. So this pulse, let's say, flies out at 500 miles an hour, meets that point where it has vacuum, but as this pulse flows out, it's already, the valve is closed and the piston, let's say, is past its halfway oscillation, so it's decelerating already. It's not going to make this as efficient at high RPM. So pretty much what we're getting from this is the length from the valve to the merge is equatable to the time in between each combustion. So if you want higher RPM, you have to make sure the length of the merge occurs at a specific time for maximum efficiency at that specific RPM. So in this example, there's not enough distance between the merge and the valve for negative pressure to effectively accelerate the cylinder. Our next example is still high RPM, but the merge is occurring a lot sooner. So here it fires out at 500 miles an hour, but this pulse, as soon as this first pulse reaches the point of merge and creates a vacuum behind it, this is when the second valve opens up. And because it's timed right, that second valve just opened up, the piston is just starting to push the gases out of its combustion chamber. This scavenge, this negative pressure that's occurring, helps aid in removing those gases, making less effort for the piston as it oscillates up, therefore increasing the efficiency and performance of the engine in that situation. So this is where scavenging is effective for high RPM. Now, using that idea, many different types of exhaust systems can be created, especially with more pistons, more cylinders. It gets more complex. This example is one of a 4-cylinder engine where you have merge happening at different points. This merge here at a closer location benefits the high RPM, as we have discussed in when we talked about our high RPM Y-pipe examples. But this merge right here towards the back benefits the low RPM. Now, because these are targeted at different RPMs, it's more designed for a wider power band. But because it's a wider power band and less focused on one, it's not going to be as powerful in that specific RPM or in any given specific RPM than if it was all combining into one, like we have here on the bottom. We have a 4-to-1. Now where the scavenging occurs at the very exact portion where it merges together, this is the length all determines the RPM you're targeting, the length between merge, and at this RPM it'll create more power than that same RPM in this first design here. Now this system can be manipulated, can be adjusted using math and science to make a specific power at a specific RPM. The length between the valve and the merge can be tuned specifically for the RPM you want the maximum power to occur. Now the maximum power means that there will be maximum efficiency in terms of scavenging occurring. Thank you. Have a nice day.